Bowers welcoming you to Dialogue here at E+ TV6, and a special opportunity to talk with a man who has served in many capacities in this state, including Congressman of the state of Tennessee. Bob Clement is with us. Presidents, Kings, and Convicts is the name of his book. There are copies of this book available at the Jackson-Madison County Public Library that he has graciously donated. You can pick this up also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any of those sites, independent bookstores out there in the state. It's a real honor to have you here.
Steve, great to be with you.
Good to see you again. And met Bob Clement for the first time in 1978 during the campaign for governor, and then campaign for Congress in '82, and many other things. He's done many, many things in his life. But life started as the son of Frank G. Clement, who was a governor of the state of Tennessee for 3 terms?
3 terms, 10 years.
And you could not succeed yourself in those days, and so it was Clement and then Ellington and Clement and Ellington, and it was the group that ran this state.
Leapfrog government, they called it, I think, Steve.
Ever since then, once we started allowing you to extend it, it's all been an 8-year term, and everybody has been able to succeed themselves. But Bob Clement has been actively involved in the state and had to be raised there. So you were 9 when your father was elected governor.
That's correct.
Okay.
And Dad was 32 years old.
Okay.
But he made up his mind at age 16, from the time he's 32, from Dixon County, not too far down the road. I'm going to be governor one day. And he'd tell his friends that. He had no money, no contacts, but big dreams and a message. Yeah. And one of the primary reasons was free textbooks, because he'd see kids without a school book trying to get an education, looking over the shoulder of another kid. And he said, if I'm elected governor, we're going to have free textbooks.
Well, you know, when I started school in Alabama, I tell people I didn't start school at 6 and a half because they didn't have kindergarten. And you bought your own books. Yeah. I mean, you bought your own books and all this stuff. It's hard for people to envision that kind of stuff.
Oh, they can't.
So that concept of service then is what prompted him to get into all of this.
That's correct. Okay. From a very young age. And then I wanted to, matter of fact, I share the first few chapters with my father and mother and all that, because they did so much for Tennessee, and a lot of this prosperity today is because of the foundation that he set. You know, talking about free textbooks, or the first Department of Mental Health and Industrial Development and Economic Development and integration of schools, and community colleges were founded, and all that happened in his administration. So, but then I get heavy into career. Okay. And also other issues. Your
father was different than other Southern governors, and that's an interesting thing. I mean, you mentioned about the positions on segregation, integration, and other things. It was just different.
Well, that's right, Steve, because he took the position as governor, whether you're for segregation or for integration, we're going to uphold the law of the land. I will never have federal marshals or troops march in Tennessee. Yeah. We will solve our problems by Tennesseans, because Governor Wallace in Alabama, Governor Faubus in Arkansas tried to get Dad to join the Southern Coalition. He refused. And I talk about that in the book, about that he was going to uphold the law of the land, and that was rather unpopular then. I mean, he could have turned Tennessee into another Mississippi or Alabama, but did not.
But it was different, and you look back on that, it set a different tone here, to the credit of the state, I think. It has helped the state, I think, in many ways. When did politics become a reality for you?
Well, at 9 years of age, when Dad was elected governor of Tennessee, and we moved in this big house, and he wouldn't let me call it governor's mansion, it was governor's residence. And being a former FBI agent, he had 30 prisoners a day to work at the governor's residence, because he believed so strongly in rehabilitation, give people a second chance. So I was around prisoners and the highway patrol, and as a 9-year-old kid, I didn't know which group I liked the best, because the prisoners had played basketball and football with me, and the highway patrol had a job.
Okay, so you were raised
and I share that in the book too.
What is that like then? Because you're in the public eye then from the time you're a child.
Yeah. Right. And well, they never wanted to put us in a straitjacket. They wanted us to be kids, myself and my brother Frank and Gary, and that's what we did. I mean, and I asked Mother and Dad, I said, I'd love to get some farm animals. And they sort of looked at me suspiciously and went along with that. And so I had 3 horses, one of them a Shetland pony named Mr. Politics. Then I had 150 chickens and 50 turkeys and 2 goats.
Okay.
That was our form of transportation around the governor's residence,
Okay.
over 12 acres.
Did Sarah
And then
Cannon live out there then?
And then I had one sorry monkey, Steve, and that's the worst pet I've ever had.
Okay.
No, Minnie Pearl came later.
Later, okay.
But she did live right
there,
next to the governor's residence once upon a time.
I wonder what the neighbors thought about all that stuff out there. I guess you get away with it in those days. When did you decide to get into politics?
Well, I decided as a teenager. I didn't know what I was going to run for. Like my father, from the time 16 to 32, was toward one goal, one objective, to run for governor of Tennessee. I knew I was going to run for public office, and my first office was Public Service Commission, which was a statewide elected office
we appoint
in Tennessee.
That now with the Tennessee Regulatory Authority.
Well, and it's different, and it doesn't have the authority that it once had, and unfortunate.
There were many people that ran for the Public Service Commission. Did you find that a good way to get exposure in
well,
the state?
I was in the U.S. Army, and my father had been killed in an automobile accident, tragic accident at age 49. And I was coming home, and I asked Commissioner Hammond Fowler, who was chairman of the Public Service Commission, for a job, and he just couldn't find me anything. So I finally went to work for University of Tennessee, and I kept thinking, well, if he were not going to hire me, I think I'm going to just run against him. Now, that won't happen very many times in life. You've got to run against the fellow that wouldn't hire you, but it sure did with me and changed my life. And I got elected at 29 and became the youngest statewide office holder in the history of Tennessee, and I still hold that record.
Okay. How many terms did you serve with the Public Service?
Well, just one term, one 6-year term. And then, as you know, I ran for governor. I had to make a decision, run for PSC again or run for governor. I ran for governor. I ran a good race. I came within 30,000 votes of winning. It was a contested primary, and Jake Butcher got the nomination.
Got the nomination. Well, it was Dick Fulton was in that race. Roger Burry from Madison County was in that race.
Well, no, that was a different.
Okay.
Well, no, it wasn't.
78.
I'll take that back. It was. It was Jake Butcher. And Dick Fulton and Roger Murray and many others. It was a crowded.
There was a crowded.
And because I just barely lost the nomination.
Is that when you said we need a runoff system in this state?
I should have. Yeah.
Because a lot of your folks, either stayed home or they voted for Lamar Alexander later.
That's correct.
Because the Butcher vote didn't move up that much.
No, it did
Lamar
not.
Alexander won that race, but I had just gotten into extensive political coverage in those days, and so it was fascinating to see. You went on the TVA board of directors then when?
Right after that, Governor Ned Ray McWhirter and Senator Jim Sasser said to President Jimmy Carter, you ought to consider Bob Clement. He was chairman of the Public Service Commission for 6 years. He got a background in regulation and all that, and so President Jimmy Carter appointed me for the unexpired term on the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority Board of Directors.
At that time,
I served there several years.
TVA board ran the organization. Now it has a full-time director, and the board.
That's correct. It's different than it was back in those days.
The three people that actually ran that. I want to pick up that story and also talk to you about, in this life when you go through those ups and downs. Bob Clement is with us. His book is called Presidents, Kings, and Convicts. He's met them all in his life, and you can find this at Barnes & Noble and on Amazon.com, and also copies at our library here in Jackson, Madison County. We'll continue this in just a moment. This is Dialogue at E+ TV 6. Welcome back to Dialogue at E+ TV 6 and a conversation with Bob Clement. Many things in his life. He served as a congressman for the state. His book is called Presidents, Kings, and Convicts, and he has met them all. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with him. I want to talk for a moment in running for governor in '78. Expectation is you get in this to win. You're son of a governor, and the Clement family well known. When you lose, how do you regroup?
Well, it hurt. It was extremely painful. And I took a survey after the race because I wouldn't know what I did wrong. Okay. I thought I ran a pretty good race.
Campaign, right.
But in a crowded field and being outspent, it was hurtful, and all that. But I also found people's feelings about it. So he said, well, Bob, you were right on the issues. You're honest. You articulated well, but you look too young. And because I didn't have gray hair back then, and I look, and even my grandmother in Dixon, Tennessee, Maybelle Clement, says, "Well, Bob, you were older than your dad, but you look so much younger." I said, "Well, I wish I'd known that. Maybe I could put a little premature gray hair there." So, but you know, life has a way of working out,
because there was another one in '82, the loss to Don Sunquist was totally unexpected.
Totally unexpected. Because
nobody knew Don Sunquist.
I got 67% of the vote in the rural counties and lost in that small area in Germantown.
Yeah, because
Shelby County.
Apparently, and to his credit, Don Sunquist knew how to organize campaigns.
That's right.
Baker County. But they got, what was it, 75–80% of that vote in Shelby County. And they had a lot of people that registered to vote. I mean, they really drove it. It was, because I was at Mr. Turner's, Ralph Turner's house down in Scotts Hill, and you and Don were down there. And it was his way. And Mr. Turner said, "Well, nobody knows this young man, but he seems like a nice young man. We're going to let him speak too." Talking about Don Sunquist, you know, who was on the way to becoming eventually governor of the state. But it was that kind of race. I mean, people knew you, didn't know Don.
That's right.
So you regroup after all of that.
That's right. And I regrouped, but I never became bitter or negative. I always looked ahead rather than behind.
Because that's
as my father said, "Son, I never lost a race. I just didn't get as many votes as that other fella." So I always took a positive approach and not let it defeat me in life. You know, some people, when they lose a race, life's over, you know. Right. And I did not let that happen to me. I've had 7 career changes, and I've made the most of every career change.
One thing about the TVA board, and because TVA was going through a huge nuclear expansion at that time, and looking back on it, there were like 16 or 17 plants that were planned, and only 6 that were ever complete, or maybe 7 now with the Watts Bar too. And it was suddenly there was huge debt for the TVA and other things, and it's looked back at now. It's like, who decided that we could handle 17 nuclear plants? Or the other side is, maybe we should have gone ahead and finished those things. We'd be selling power all over the country today if we had.
Steve, you're asking some great questions. And when I came on the board, Red Wagner, who wasn't on the board anymore, had ordered 17 nuclear reactors. Yeah. Now, those 17 nuclear reactors were supposed to have cost $6 billion, but they were going to cost a lot more.
Well, it was what, $4.5 billion spent just at Bellefonte.
And we had 55,000 employees, and I had a $6 billion budget. And I went on the attack, not that I was opposed to the nuclear option, but because I was not, but we were overbuilding, over-projecting, and in my opinion, we were losing TVA. And we're losing our competitiveness. And so I went on the attack to curtail part of the nuclear program, and that's what ultimately happened. Because we couldn't afford to build 17 nuclear reactors at time. That time it was just too expensive, because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had put new rules and regulations on building nuclear plants were making them much more expensive than they were when Red Wagner ordered them.
So when Red Wagner ordered them, the idea is you would build 17 of them for $6 billion total.
That's correct.
Because if I toured Bellefonte when they were talking about reopening it back in 2011, and they've since sold it. But they said they had $4.5 billion just in that one plant.
It was staggering how much money it was going to cost.
Was that based on, looking back on that, was that based on a feeling of need, or was
well,
it just...
it was almost as if, you know, you build these nuclear plants, you can almost give the electricity away. You know, it's going to be such a great bargain. But then it got to be not such a great bargain, and it was sold on the basis of clean energy and all that, and safe energy and all that. So there were a lot of issues that came up concerning nuclear.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating that you were right there during the midst of all that.
I was right in the middle of it at that time.
Stunning today. Because as the TVA goes, so goes this valley.
That's correct. And you got to give Franklin Delano Roosevelt a lot of credit when he was president of the United States. because he's the one that founded TVA, that served Tennessee, but served parts of 7 states.
Senator Norris and all those other guys.
It meant a lot to the Tennessee Valley area and turned us around.
I think if we'd waited for Con Edison, we'd still be plowing behind a mule in Perry County today.
We may be.
You're right. When did you decide to re-enter? Then you became a college president. How did you find that experience? Was that a rewarding experience?
I guess some of the board felt like, well, Clement had already been burned politically, and maybe he'd be a good college president, knows how to raise money and knows how to manage people and resources. So they chose me as their president of Cumberland University. It was a 2-year college, and they wanted to move it to a 4-year college and get it fully accredited. That's the toughest job I've ever had, Steve. Saving the college, number one, and then moving it to a 4-year college. I tripled the private gifts to the university, doubled the educational income, and now we got a new president, President Paul Stump, and he's doing a great job taking it to a new, higher level.
We were just talking.
I'm proud of it.
I attended Freed Hardeman. We
Matter
went
of
through the
fact,
same transition.
I'm having a book signing there
That was right.
in a few weeks.
So still a good relationship. We talked about Freed Hardeman here in West Tennessee. Same
And
transition,
Freed
junior college
Hardeman, I
to senior.
love Freed Hardeman. And when Dr. Gardner was there particularly, I worked with Freed Hardeman a lot. And I think it's a wonderful school. And they moved into Dixon County.
Yeah, they have.
And
Expanded.
Germantown, Germantown, and they're doing great.
When did you decide to re-enter the political arena then?
Well, after some disappointments and all that, and then I regrouped and all that, and I was president of Cumberland University, and Bill Boner decided to give up his congressional seat. He hadn't resigned yet, but to run for mayor of Nashville. And so I resigned early. And I almost made a big mistake because I felt like I had to plan and organize and all that. But I'd been at Cumberland for 4.5 years and fulfilled my goals and objectives there. And then Bill Boner almost got beat for mayor. Phil Bredesen almost beat me. That would have messed me up because I would have already resigned. But I felt like I had to get a head start because then Bredesen lost to Bill Boner, and then Bredesen turned around and decided to run for Congress. And I was running too. And my poll showed, Bob Clement, you're behind. So I was the underdog, Phil.
Wow.
And then I had to run a very
Well, he got a lot of publicity out of that campaign.
And I won. And over Phil Bredesen
Yeah.
and Jane Eskin and some others, and I became the U.S. Congressman. I served there 15 years, 8 terms.
Yeah. And Phil Bredesen is another example of somebody that you may lose the initial campaign. He kept coming back, became mayor.
Kept coming
lost
back.
his first campaign for governor against Don Sunquist, then came back 8 years later and became governor. So,
it was mayor and then later governor of Tennessee.
Yeah.
Did
stuff.
well.
All of them right there in the same. Jane Eskin, another one. That is a great name to remember. Bob Clement is with us. His book is called Presidents, Kings, and Convicts. We'll talk about the title and the content of this book when we continue this conversation here at Dialogue at E+TV6. Welcome back to Dialogue at E+TV6. If you just joined us, be sure to catch us on replay. We're talking with Bob Clement. His book is called Presidents, Kings, and Convicts. He's met them all. Son of the former governor of Tennessee, congressman, and actively involved in public life. You've mentioned a lot of names. I want to give you a chance to talk about this book you mentioned earlier. You talked about your father and all. And then the title is based on?
Presidents, Kings, and Convicts. I've met every president from President Harry Truman all the way through Obama. And I tell a great story in there about Truman spending the night at the governor's residence, and Dad checking on him at 5:30 in the morning, no Truman. And this was prior to Secret Service. Then he goes downstairs, asks the Highway Patrol, where's President Truman? Well, Governor, we hadn't seen him. They found him walking down Curtiswood Lane in front of the governor's residence.
Because he walked every day.
All by himself.
He walked every day.
And Dad being a former FBI agent, how do you lose a president? But that's how presidents and then kings. Met a lot of royal family. I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee and Transportation Budget Committee in Washington. And then I talk about the king also that performed at the governor's residence.
And that's King of Rock and Roll.
Elvis Presley.
So he came to the governor's residence and performed.
Well, just for the family. Colonel Tom Parker called my father and says, Governor, Elvis is in town. This is before he was a superstar, 1956.
Okay. Well, that was
Dad
a transition
says,
year.
bring him out to the governor's residence. Then Dad got, remember, I'm the fly on the wall, just watch and observe as governor's son. Then Dad called the warden at the state penitentiary. He said, bring the prisoners out here.
That's right,
to perform. And they were great
singers. They were great singers, had records out.
All of them had 99-year sentences, and the lead singer had 6 99-year sentences. Johnny Bragg, who wrote the song "Just Walking in the Rain."
That's right.
And,
But
they
had records.
But they had plenty of time to practice. So here they were out there, and the family was out there, and Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis got so carried away, stayed till 3 o'clock in the morning.
So he sang with them.
And we were upstairs at the governor's residence, played the piano, and sang and harmonized with the prisoners. And every time he'd come to Nashville after that, he'd call my father, Governor, you think I could go out to the state penitentiary and see the prisoners?
Okay.
And I have no doubt he got a lot of his ideas about Jailhouse Rock and other songs about from his exposure to the prisoners. And then Convicts, I grew up with them at the governor's residence because Dad worked 30 prisoners a day to cook the food and cut the grass and all that. And so they were my best friends.
Okay. What did that experience then do to you or for you?
Well, a better understanding of people, that people can make mistakes in life and can be forgiven and live a better life and give people an opportunity to improve their station in life and all that. And so I think it was a growing experience for me. You would think living in the governor's residence, you'd be very sheltered and you wouldn't have opportunity for exposure and all that, but I did. And I wanted to share that in a book. And I'm not saying everyone should write a book, but when we die, our family or friends need to know, what do we stand for? What do we believe in? What do we care about?
What do you hope people will get out of reading?
I'm trying to encourage young people to not reject public service and politics. My Aunt Annabelle Clement O'Brien,
I interviewed her more than once.
State House and State Senate from Crossville, Tennessee, and she said it better than anyone about politics and public service. Politics builds roads. Politics builds schools. Politics helps crippled children walk. Politics is compromise. Because everyone thinks of politics and public service is dirty and negative. Well, we need people with caliber people, quality people to run for public office. And I talk about limiting campaign spending and fixing Congress, fixing America. That's what I want people to remember.
Sarah Cowell from this family is still in politics.
Oh, yeah, she's state senator from Memphis.
And so that legacy continues.
I got a cousin, Jim Cowell, he's judge in Memphis. And so,
I covered this stuff for a long time. I loved covering it. It breaks my heart almost to see what it's become today. That this, I mean, campaigning was always pointed and everything else and whatever, but the vindictiveness of it, the isolation of it, almost just like this side has all the answers and this side has none, and I don't believe that. And
no, I don't either.
And it has disappointed me to see the rhetoric. You know, we're passing bills in the Senate with one vote, which is not going to hold. You know, it long term. I interviewed Joe Califano a couple of years ago. His book came back out. He told me the story. He said, Lyndon Johnson asked him one day, he said, how are we doing on that bill, Joe? And he said, well, we're fine, Mr. President. And he said, well, we got the votes. And he said, well, how many Republicans have we got? And he said, we don't have any. We're not going to have them. He said, Lyndon Johnson told him, he said, Joe, may not have to have them to get it passed. We're going to have their help to get it implemented. He said, get in there and find out what they want. Let's get some of them on board. And I said, is anybody in D.C. talking to you now, Mr. Califano? And he said, no, they don't. And I said, well, somebody needs to.
Steve, I was sitting by an old congressman when I first got to Washington, and I'd sit by the old timers a lot. And this one had been there over 40 years. I said, I bet you've seen a lot of changes. He says, Bob, I have, and I've been against him the whole time. So, but we have seen a lot of changes, but a lot of it's not good. And they've even shortened the schedule. I talk about that in the book too. We used to work from Monday to Friday. Now they fly in on Tuesday and leave on Thursday. So if I don't know you and you don't know me, how are we going to solve problems? How are we going to compromise? How are we going to reach across the aisle? And this gridlock and deadlock and this abuse, I always attack the issue. I never attack my fellow colleague, Democrat or Republican. I attack the issue. Let's find a way to solve the problem. And we can do it again by working together. I know in rural West Tennessee, a lot of people are Republican, and I know, but mostly they're conservative.
Right.
So they'd vote for a Democrat or Republican if given the opportunity.
I talked to one other person that served in Congress, and he mentioned that. He said, you know, he said at one time people lived in D.C. And he said they played ball together and whatever. He said, he said, we've got it now. You fly in, fly out, and you're under pressure to spend all this time back home. He said, which is not a bad thing. But he said what it has done is broken down those personal relationships that had existed among members of Congress and the Senate. And he said it's made it difficult.
No doubt about that. And I moved my family up there because I wanted them to have the experience of living up there. And I think it made me a better congressman because I wanted to be balanced when it comes to constituency service, but also on the legislative side, because I was there 15 years, 8 terms, and I wanted to make the most of the time when I was there.
What is life today for Bob Clement?
You know, I've enjoyed it, a new chapter of my life. I'm business consultant. I represent the University of Central Florida down in Orlando. They wanted an international partner, and Railway Supply Institute, a vendor for railroads and all that.
Railroads are doing well in this country.
And transportation, because I was a senior member of the Transportation Committee. But the last 2 years, I dropped everything to write this book because I didn't think I had the discipline or focus, Steve, to write a book. I was afraid I'd be lost in the weeds, and I did hire 2 great people, one from Maryland, one from D.C., just to keep me on track and keep me from going in the high weeds and stay on message, which I think I have.
In this process, and people I've talked to that write, sometimes things happen to them that they didn't expect. Anything happen to you? If you remember things, find out things? Or
well, I'll tell you where it helped me and may help others. Is pictures. I have 3 batches of pictures in here. And when you look at a picture, you have a story. And you can tell the story from a picture. And a lot of people can do that, right? Do a picture book. But I found that I could do it through the pictures, but I also kept good notes. I had started a book years ago, hadn't finished it, and I got that out, and then through oral interviews and a lot of research, and then you have to decide what's in and what's out. And what do you want to say or what don't you
Will there then be a sequel to this?
And then, Steve, no.
But
I wanted to take the high road, not the low road, and that's what I did.
Okay, all right. So there won't be a sequel to this?
I don't think so. I would doubt very seriously. It just takes such a commitment, and I feel like I've said what I wanted to say.
Okay. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity.
Steve, it's great to be with you. You're a legend in your time.
I appreciate this very much. Presidents, Kings, and Convicts, Bob Clement. And this is available at Jackson-Madison County Public Library, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, and a real pleasure to have you here. Stay with us here at E+ TV 6. This is the place where the dialogue continues.